Okay, so we're going to do this presentation in two parts. I'm going to talk about what is serendipity, how the APIs work, and then Alison will talk to you about how we've been using serendipity to try to give you a bit of an idea of what to do with it. So just in a show of hands, have any of you ever integrated to a third-party API to do something technically? Okay, so you all know that it's actually very simple. Those of you have done it, and we didn't actually need that session. I could just give you the API documentation and you can run ahead and do it. So we will do that, but that will take about 30 seconds and we'll put up the APIs and we'll tell it. More, we want to talk to you about what to do with those APIs because that's where the magic lies as opposed to how to use it. So to kind of give you like a bit of a sense of the hackathon, because in the 3 different groups that I was at, there was this very strong drive of winning, and that's very good. But there actually isn't a winner or a loser within the hackathon. There is a sponsor that will invest in your idea or won't invest in your idea. And the hackathon, you don't have a very long time before the hackathon. That's 2 weeks, and then you have 22 hours. So you don't have enough time to build the next Facebook. You might be able to build it, but you won't have enough time to convince the potential sponsor that you can get 500 million users. So a good theme or a good advice that I would give all of you for the hackathon is solve one solution that you can prove and make it quite contained, and those other ideas that you have around what you can do can form at a later stage because you're trying to convince someone to physically invest in your idea. So one example is 315 builds a solution using the Serendipity APIs, and they built a solution that automatically creates metadata whenever a document is added onto your SharePoint. That's very simple but very powerful because until you have metadata in SharePoint, you can't actually search for the content inside the document in SharePoint. You can't find it, and users never assign metadata. How long did it take them to develop this? 5 days, and it's now going to market. So that's a classic example of a quick win, that if you understand your market, you understand another product, you understand what Serendipity does, you can develop something very quickly, and that would have been very fitting for the hackathon. So I'm going to go through this PowerPoint just to give you a bit of an idea of what Serendipity is. 30 seconds, 1 minute, I'll go through the APIs because that's documented and you'll have that, and then Alison will give you a bit of a functional use case of what to do with it. So this is our premise. What Firestring really wants to do is we want to make the enterprise look more like this and less like SAP and less like SharePoint. So Amazon is what I want to focus on the most. Amazon has 14 million products, and you've all bought this on Amazon, and you've probably heard me say this 1,000 times, but when you purchase something on Amazon, Amazon will automatically recommend something else that you may be interested in buying. So if you're looking at a cell phone on Amazon, Amazon is going to recommend a screen protector, which is the exact size for that phone. Now, someone didn't curate that manually. That would be ludicrous. I think we worked it out once. It would take 2,000 man-years to curate that manually. They use a bunch of algorithms that look at historical buying patterns. They can see a trend that people that have purchased this have purchased that. And the algorithms are sufficiently confident to bundle those products together and sell them to you. Why that is important is that enterprise firstly doesn't work that way. So within a SharePoint environment, if you were looking at one document, there could be a similar document in your repository which is semantically related, which means contextually the content of it is the same, but you don't know that it exists. In an Amazon model, Amazon would recommend it to you. In the enterprise, you probably should rewrite the document because you don't know it's there. So we call our product Serendipity because it helps you find what you didn't know existed in the first place. So why do we need Serendipity if we know how Amazon does it? It's very simple. Amazon has hundreds of thousands of transactions an hour. Therefore, within the law of average, they can be fairly confident that people that have purchased this have purchased that because hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people have purchased this item. So there's a statistical relevance between what other people have purchased. In the enterprise, if we were to use the same algorithm, saying that the people that have viewed this document have also viewed that document, you may be interested in it, it's probably not going to work because chances are 2 people have viewed that document, and there's actually no meaning out of that. So a tool like Serendipity allows you to have Amazon-like referrals on your systems without relying on large pools of data because it actually reads the content of the document and is able to contextually understand the content and match it together. So it doesn't require a transactional historical pattern to determine that. So this is our current landscape to let you know where we're coming from. Organizational data is growing exponentially. They say that if every year's data stored is greater than all the previous years combined. So basically every time you store data, that's very expensive. Storage is expensive. And every time you have a transaction with Amazon, Amazon becomes more intelligent because it refers things to you based on that transaction. In an enterprise, generally, every time you store something in SharePoint or your shared drive, you probably become less intelligent because your search becomes less and less effective and you're less likely to find what you're looking for and you can't filter the noise. So you've got the law of diminishing returns where your storage costs are increasing, but the value that you're getting out of your data is decreasing. So that makes a very easy sale if you can quantify that to the CIO. So current ECM tools, SAP, SharePoint, very good at record management, very good at governed content. In fact, they're quite exceptional. We can't really think of how to enhance the way they currently store information. But these systems rely on user adoption and metadata, or in the SAP context, they rely on you uploading the content in an intelligent, structured manner, making sure that your repositories are set up correctly or your workflows are set up correctly. So in a perfect world, and I'm sorry this is a bit biased for SharePoint, but your users will always upload important content. Your users will always tab content, your users will never upload duplicate content, and you won't suffer the law of diminishing returns. It's a tongue-in-cheek statement because I haven't met a single organization that follows the perfect world. So if any of you have ever created a website and you wanted Google to index your website, you go to Google Site Tools and you say, enter your URL, and then Google will index it. Google doesn't say, sorry, it looks like your website has duplicate content and no metadata, please try again. Google just takes it and it does something with it. And Google is handling billions of websites. And yet the enterprise requires this rigorous structure to upload content which just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So in our world, what we observe that documents stored in ECM are rarely accessed and rarely reused, which is quite upsetting because you're paying a lot for storage. Users are reluctant to add metadata, and more importantly, knowing what keyword to search for is often a challenge. So search shouldn't actually be called search. Search should be called retrieval, because if you're searching for something, you're basically asking to retrieve something that you know is there. And like the Amazon approach or the YouTube approach, where you probably spend hours of your life on YouTube going from one video to another, watching related videos that you never thought of in the first place, doesn't happen within the enterprise. So there's no discoverability, there's only retrieval of what you know is there. Again, that's quite sad, considering how effective the consumer space is. So we do it differently. So the name of our tool, Serendipity, the social semantic engine. We use the notion of crowdsourcing, and we use tools in SQL Server 2012 to help us do it better. We have a very simple philosophy. If you have 2 million people within your organization constantly uploading a dictionary with information, you wouldn't need to assign metadata because they would do it for you. So those 2 million people exist, and it's called Wikipedia, it's called MetaWeb, it's called Freebase, it's called very large open repositories that people on the internet have already developed. So Firestring found a way to download it, deploy it on-premise, structure it in a way that makes sense to us, and use that information to annotate and tag your content automatically. Effectively, you've got 2 million librarians working for you, but through a server that's instantaneous. So that's just feedback of what it runs on. It uses natural language processing, which basically means it's a linguistic algorithm which looks at a sentence and understands within the structure of the sentence if you're talking about an object, a person, a place, or time. And then using that, it has additional information that it abstracts out of that, and we'll show you how that looks within the API. So now, we've got parts of Serendipity are accessible via an API, and as you all know, when you build a system, sometimes you develop something ahead of what your API is capable of, and unfortunately that's the case with us. You have version 1 of our API. We'll show you what we have in version 2, and if it's something that you drastically need for your projects, we can look at speeding that up. But I'll show you where the line starts and ends in terms of what you can do, but I'll give you an idea of what's happening behind the scenes. So this is a demo, a visual demo of what would happen on an API level. It's quite small, let me make that bigger. It's basically a piece of text that you send to the API, and this is text about dimension data. Text about dimension data that we took from Wikipedia. So Serendipity indexes it, you call the API, and you send it a stream of text. And we'll show you how to do that on the API level. It then comes back, and again, it's a little small, but it comes back with all these keywords on the right which are related to it. It's not just keywords, it's key phrases. So it's not just doing a weighting and saying there's a lot of the, ands, and this and that. These are topical words: services, professional services, external takeover, shareholders, company references. These are all the meaty topics that were in the document for dimension data. Further than that, If you look there, it found NTT, and it knows that NTT is actually Nippon Telegraph and Telephone, and it knows that it's a public company. Now, that's where the API ends, and that's still very powerful, and Alison will show you practical examples of what we're doing with just that layer of the API. A second element of what we do further is the internet knows who NTT is. Right? Because if you Google NTT, you'll get a lot of information. So our system takes advantage of that, and our system then knows a lot more about NTT. So if you drill down, it'll give you an abstract. It'll say, commonly known as NTT is a Japanese telecommunication company. It'll know that it was founded in 1985, and it'll know that it's a Japanese company. It knows that because the internet knows that. And our algorithms are able to pull that information and then give you additional info about NTT that your document didn't have in the first place. Now, why is that important? In a traditional ECM environment, if you were to search for the word Japanese telecommunication company, and you had that original text that we stored, all it had is the word NTT and dimension data, you'd get no results because search engines are very efficient and only look for keywords. With a tool like ours, if you search for a Japanese telecommunications company, that phrase is attached to that keyword NTT and you'd get a result. So another example is if we were to pick up the word SQL Server, for example, I've simply say SQL Server is a relational database system. So if someone searches for relational database system, you get no results. On our system you would, because we know relational database system belongs to SQL Server. So showing you under the bonnet how it works, it's no longer that magical, but the effect for the end user is, oh my god, I have cognitive search because my system suddenly knows the association between these different words. And that's essentially how it works. So what does Serendipity enable? Automatically applying metadata, leveraging semantic matching to push relevant content, so that's the Amazon approach. Extending searchable attributes and surfacing insights in your content that you didn't know existed in the first place. So that's a bit of background of what it does. I'm going to show you the API. The API is dead simple. Like I said, 315 was able to plug into this in minutes. My API has disappeared. Okay, so we're going to upload this PDF onto Raw Talent. Again, you can just drop me a mail, drop any of us a mail, if you need any help around it. But it's very self-explanatory. It explains what the semantic engine does, which I'll give you an even better overview. And then it gives you the URL for the API call. So it uses something called REST, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but it's a REST-based API, which means it's just plain text, it's not encoded, it returns formats in a JSON structure. So it's very easy to debug. The URL is there, 5.9.58.73. And then it tells you what parameters you have to pass. So when you call the base URL, you pass system ID. Now, why that is important is you can have multiple systems within an organization. You can have many instances of SharePoint, you can have many instances of SAP. So what we do is, if you choose, we store the metadata that you send us, and then you can run a report saying, find me a document that is similar to that document with that system ID. Again, that's our second version of the API, so in your context you wouldn't need that, but if you think you might need that down the line, use a unique system ID, because you may have multiple applications accessing Serendipity. Password, we've left it default for you, so you guys don't need a password. You can just send a plain string. The API is open for you guys for the hackathon to do whatever you need to do. There's no limitation. Text, that's the text that you're passing it. So let's say you're working in SAP, for example, and you want to do a scenario where you want to show if one document is similar to another document. When a document is uploaded, you'll send the text of the document, not the document itself. So it's a PDF, you'll send the text inside of it, and you'll pass that to our API. For support, contextual score, it says just use the default of 0. Count means limit the results, because, for example, we've tested it with the Bible, and then you get 5 million results back. For example, you can limit it to 100, and it'll give you the top 100 related keywords. And generally, you'll find anything more than that is irrelevant anyway, so that's just a limiter. Annotate annotate, that's for the next version of the API, so whether you send true or false, it doesn't matter. Annotate means that it'll give you the additional information that you have within the context of the entity example. It'll tell you a Japanese telecommunications company. Strict, again, you'll set it to true. Basically, it'll cut out any duplicates. So you could have a scenario where the word apple comes up, and apple could be apple the company, or it could be apple the fruit. If you set it to strict, it'll only return apple. If you set strict to false, it'll give you apple twice, and it'll tell you the one is a company, the one is a fruit, for example. So processing a document, it shows you all the parameters that you have to pass. So there's an example input. I like to eat apples and take pictures of it using my Apple iPad. The results that you get back is output over this. So it'll say key phrase apples, resource apple of type species, key phrase apple, iPad, resource, iPad type thing. So from that you get a sense that you've got apple the fruit, or you've got apple the technology. Okay, and then that table just shows you the format of what it would look like once you convert it from a JSON format into a structure. You get returned a key phrase, you get returned a URL, that's just a unique URL on our system. Again, it's for the phase 2 of the API. So if you wanted to query our system and say, tell me more about the resource iPad, it'll probably say something like iPad is a tablet device developed by Apple Corporation. So when someone searches for tablet, iPad would come up, and the type is what it is. It's a company, it's a thing, it's a species in this context of the fruit. And that's that. So we're going to upload that onto Raw Talent. Like I said, if you've integrated into any REST-like API before, you'll find it very easy. If you have a problem, get in touch with us. But really, it really is that straightforward. Cool. So I'm going to hand it over to Alice. Alice, do you have any questions at this point?
Does it need to be SQL 2012?
Well, no. So
on premises and 2012 licenses being double
so
2008.
The version that you're using, the phase 1 per se of the API, doesn't actually use SQL Server 2012 because we're not storing any information. The version 2, where you're passing system ID, where you have a hand enterprise approach where you're indexing content from multiple repositories, that will need it. So chances are, I'm assuming you're going to solve one problem, and that one problem will be, you won't have that scenario. But if you do chat to us, and then we'll give you an idea of what the license ramifications could be. But for what else I'm going to show you now, SQL Server 2012 isn't needed.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, so it's going to be very quick because maybe you've all seen this. Who of you are on Raw Talent already? You're all on it. Just let me ask you, where are you all from? Which company are you from?
315.
And you?
315.
And you guys, these two are from Firestring? Nice. I know you guys, and then also SSD. Right? Okay, so the first thing that we did with Serendipity was to plug it into our own enterprise social network. But the thing is, that wasn't really our sort of primary intention. It was just a showcase for what can happen as a use case. Because as Tal said, the next step was to work with 315, who then made a connector for SharePoint. And we're working with other companies who are working on other enterprise content management systems like Documentum. So they're making connectors for Documentum. We've got other partners who are building their own bespoke software, BPM software, whatever it is, and they're using the Serendipity API to add additional value to their bespoke systems. So the whole point for us is that Serendipity was designed as an engine and API-driven to be extensible, and that each use case would make sense in the context of that industry or that customer, but that we as Firestring don't need to necessarily get involved in that use case. So all we're doing is providing links to the Serendipity platform, which will read your text and bring back metadata. And then, as Tal explained, version 2, it's not just metadata, key phrases, and so on. It's extended what we call smart attributes. So you can put up something about ESCOM, we'll know that you also mean coal, renewable energy, Medupi. You could be in an organization. The example we always use is, as a salesperson, I could be coming into Firestring and saying, okay, I've got to write a tender for Vodacom. But just say I recently joined the organization, has anybody else written tenders in the telco sector? So I go on to SharePoint and I search for Vodacom, and nothing comes back. Because actually 3 years ago someone wrote a tender for MTN, but I didn't know that because I've just joined. So searching Vodacom isn't going to let me find MTN, but if Serendipity is there, it will. Because Serendipity, using the internet as its sort of informer, understands that both Vodacom and MTN are telcos, therefore there is a contextual or semantic relationship between those organizations. Therefore, TEL always explains it as search is like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but Serendipity makes that needle much bigger. Because it's not just now keyword Vodacom, it's telcos, WASPA, mobile telephony, whatever, a million terms that the internet thinks is related to Vodacom. So let me just take you through one quick example, which is on raw talent, and just show you a very minor but still quite compelling use case. And when we show this to customers who are using our enterprise social network like Console or the Development Bank of South Africa or PPC Cement, they get very excited about this, even though we think it's just the tip of the iceberg. So what they get excited about is not that we've made an interactive intranet or a portal. What they get excited about is this thing on the right, that suddenly the portal can start recommending content. And we're not going to do that and take much notice of that on raw talent. But that's for us a sort of showcase of possibility. Because normally when you go into corporate intranets, it's done. You can go and look at your content, if you can find it, you have to go search for it, or you have to look in the front page who has curated what administrators put up with. But with Serendipity plugged into this, it starts, and then the code that was built on this platform, it understands that Johan is a programmer, Allison's a salesperson, and he's an analyst support person. So we write our interests. So when you register on raw talent, it asks you for interest. So if we take a look at TEL's profile, if we clicked on view profile, he'd say, his interests are whatever related to his fields of endeavor. Then Serendipity is being used in this environment to index all the content that's shared. You may have noticed that. I'm going to show you an example. And in indexing, it brings back metadata, but not just actual words, it can have key phrases. So if something gets posted by, let's say, this guy over here, put up an article. So a week ago, this person put up an article about a collab in Kenya. In Uganda. And that's the text that he puts up. So some web article that he shared. Okay. And without doing it manually, obviously Serendipity, as you've probably seen in raw talent, automatically added those key phrases. So it did that right away. So it knows that this article is talking about innovation, developers, businesses, education, economy, social issues, young people, Kampala, Uganda. And obviously the mechanism behind it is there isn't a group of people doing that, making the library. It basically references this against the open data sets we're using on the web. It says that if you're talking about Uganda's first tech hub, these are the things that relate to it. Therefore, two things happen in this environment. One, if I log on, or in this case using TEL's login, we can be clever about it. We can build some intelligence and we can make recommendations because we know now that content is being stored about that and everything else that's been shared on Rotan. And we can start to do matching. And we can say, based on your profile, TEL, we think these things are going to be of interest to you. Because we understand we've taken the unstructured content, which was those blogs, those text docs, and we've structured it with sets of metadata. And then basically a query was set up in the code for this enterprise social network. The query says, if TEL's interests are X, recommend content that is X or similar to X. And if I log on, it's going to show me different things. It's going to show me things related to my interests, which may be more sales related. The second point that we've done in terms of what we've done with Serendipity here is we built it into the search. So the search is powered by Serendipity. So if TEL, for example, were to search on Microsoft, then it returns 85 results. And some of those are people like Cobus Leerling, who has an interest in Microsoft CRM. You might see groups like Firestring Microsoft Roadmap, or a blog like our FNB's blog. Okay, that's search. But what Serendipity allows is dynamic search filters or search refiners to pop up on the fly. incredibly powerful. So no one's pre-coded those. It does that because it knows that it's storing content related to my query, in other words, Microsoft. But that there's a relationship between Microsoft in raw talent, in terms of the content that's been added. Understands that there's a relationship between Microsoft and Xbox, but also Microsoft and innovation, and also Microsoft the company, or Microsoft and Surface, the Surface tab. So it can say to you, well, let's narrow this down. Because if this was a very large intranet, you might not have 85 results, you might have 85,000, and that's when it becomes unmanageable. So it says, no, but hold on, we can see that there's a contextual relationship between Microsoft and these things. So would you like to see the relationship between, say, Microsoft and Google, and only search around that? In which case, when the person selects the refiner, now you're getting one result. And that's useful. That's search that actually works. It's discovery, not just search. And to show you a different example, if we search for Firestring, and remember, obviously, this is search within this corporate environment, so it's not searching the whole web, it's just searching content that's been loaded here. There's 51 results. So we're searching for Google, 127 results. And again, it says, but do you want Google and big data, or do you want Google and Facebook, etc.? So it's changing these refiners based on the intelligence being provided by Serendipity. So now it's only 5 results. So what 315 has done is build a connector for SharePoint, which is a very quick installer. It indexes all content in SharePoint and has an event handler that every time you add content to SharePoint, it will index that content and provide metadata. And what it does is it gives that metadata into the enterprise keywords column, so that the native SharePoint search now has metadata that it can use to refine search results. Obviously, one of the things that we're wanting to do is do that in SAP. What would the ramifications be in CRM? When you say, I'm processing a query from this customer, but I'd like to understand more context, or I'd like to see who else has dealt with this customer, and what's the history of this customer, or what's the history of everybody who's been calling from the telecommunications sector, not just from this company. How have we handled queries like this from the motor industry? You know, so you can actually become more contextual, not just keyword-based, in terms of a number of different points of view from a CRM perspective. And I know, Greg, you were working with Tel on a thing around Mercedes, so we just pitched on a job with Mercedes, which is another example. Mercedes is introducing chat into their SAP CRM interface so that call center agents can have text chat online with customers. We've all seen that, right? So, but what that means is that they're generating text logs. And so we're proposing to integrate Serendipity into their SAP CRM backend and let Serendipity bring back metadata. So that if you were a call center agent and he calls and says, I want information about going on a test drive, but you're a new agent, you don't know how to respond. As you're typing test drive to him, it can bring up a window that says, here are calls that were successful with other customers that related to test drive. And you can almost get like a sort of predictive view of what might work for this guy. And we do that in 2 ways. One, indexing the text chat log, seeing how it relates to other text chat logs that have happened with other customers. Also asking the customers for their feedback. You know, rate this call. So if you've ever been on a thing with Discovery, at the end they'll send you a little SMS saying, was it satisfactory? So any chat text, that the customer said, yes, this worked for me, will obviously get a higher weighting, which is like social voting, the customer's telling you it worked. So we'll put that one at the top of the widget, so the next time the agent says, how do I deal with someone asking for a test drive? It'll pop up and say, the best calls relating to test drive were these. Gives the guy a little cue. It's just one example. That's it. That's, you know, sky's the limit, because basically what we're doing is allowing you to query text in ways that one can think of so many different examples. Also, just another one, we talk about working with a meteor. This is sort of version 2, and Tel was saying if any of you have ideas that will require version 2 of the APIs, where we're using the smart
pop-up comes up. But it's always just 2 things. Where are you getting the data? How are you displaying the data? Serendipity can help you in the middle of joining the dots together.
Have you guys received the raw talent newsletters, those mails that come saying you've got X number of notifications, and it will also give you your recommendations?
Yes, and it says it includes the recommendations of people.
Yeah. So that's just another way of surfacing in our context, where you don't even need to show the user this metadata. It's actually irrelevant.
Yeah.
But you want to try to drive adoption and get people onto the system, so you push those recommendations to them in email shots. And it's personalized. My recommendations are different to yours.
Got the idea then.
And yeah, I think what you were saying around Duet is really about surfacing SAP content in SharePoint. The interesting one is, what about non-SAP content for SAP users? And what about all of that content for the average knowledge worker? So in a SASL where I'm using SharePoint and SAP and open text and live link and 50-minute and email more than anything, how do I find across those different applications the thing that says, well, stop working on this voter contender because someone did it 2 months ago for MTN and you don't know about it, but it was in their mail. And that's the big prize that we're trying to aim for. And every time we talk to customers about that, they're like, shit, that's actually the bottom line.
I was thinking of building something like this recommended feed into Outlook.
It's exactly 100
Yeah.
million%.
And the recommendations could come from any third-party system, as long as you separate your interface with where you're sucking the data from. You could always extend it at a later stage.
Yeah, so you could be pulling it from just Exchange. And we've discussed, we had a partner, another Microsoft partner, who's going to be building that in Exchange. The architect recently left, blah, blah, so that's actually not happening right now.
So it's already done.
Sorry?
So it's already
No,
done.
no, no.
Yeah, so it's
They
not
were
done.
going to do it. They were going to build an Exchange.
We're going to.
We're going to.
So not anymore. Okay.
They actually, the guy just left and they don't have resource, blah. So we're working with a bunch of different people who are saying, let's try it in Exchange, let's try it. But right now, no one's doing it in Exchange. We personally think that's the #1 prize, because we all live in our email.
Yeah.
And so right there, I want to be typing a mail to Jay saying, oh wow, I'm putting this bid together for Mercedes. And if I've turned on my settings and everything, while I'm doing it, it should index that. I mean, that's one option. It should index the mail that I'm writing, just like Gmail does, and show me context-sensitive recommendations. And so Gmail's been doing that. When it started, we all got a big fright because I was busy writing to him saying I'm going to the game reserve, and then I suddenly saw all ads for Safari. And I was like, shit, Gmail's reading my email. Now we're like, oh, thank you, that's very helpful. But at work, I'm busy writing to him saying, I'm busy tearing my hair out trying to write this thing for Mercedes. Meanwhile, there could be 50 other things related to it, and I've got no insight into it.
But like in the SAP environment, I mean, you're obviously talking about sales and proposals and things. What I see on a like all over the place is that people are, I'm talking about like common activities like buying, like buyers placing orders with vendors, or salespeople creating sales orders for customers. And you would think that it's an integrated system, and the customer and the material and the price and everything is already in SAP, so you just process the transaction there. But in most cases, that simple sales transaction or that procurement process is supported by mountains of effort outside in Excel and Word and in mails. And it's like, is there not a way to identify that in some way, to either make it easier to do, or to say, well, rather replace what you're doing in Excel with some new business process or something new.
Or just bring intelligence.
Yeah, to bring intelligence to all this effort that happens outside. So you find often people that are doing the same thing, each have their own Excel spreadsheet that's basically doing the same thing. But they don't know that you're doing it and you're doing it and you're doing it. Basically, why not have either something in Office or in Excel that's common, or to put it on SharePoint or do it differently. So what happens is everyone's doing the same thing. It's so repetitive, but nobody knows that. And it's only when you start having workshops and understanding the business that you realise that it happens all over the place. So if there's a way of identifying something.
But I think, sorry, just architecturally, it's not. I don't think it's very different from the sales scenario or any other scenario. Your business process of why you need it done might be different from the scenario we're portraying in Outlook. But architecturally, if you just build a platform where it doesn't really care about the person, but
need to.
you can plug in data and then display the results in Outlook or maybe in emails or in SMS. You could just have a holistic approach which solves the problem in various different areas.
No, I think so. Yeah. I mean,
But the use cases are interesting because it talks to the world that we live in, and I can sort of think about the interfaces. Within Britehouse, I don't know if you know, but we all use the shared retainer-based service of Mahan's attorneys, right?
yes.
And I mean, so I asked them for a partner agreement, and they charged me and give me one, and then Paolo might have done the same. 15 other people. No one's looking at sort of, is this a duplicate agreement? Are we asking for the same thing? And that's just because we email him. And then we'll come together into a sales meeting and find that actually I'm trying to target X, Y, and Z customer, and I have no idea, but that's been SSD's customer for 3 years. And, millions of opportunities, you guys working on code, the guy next to you might be working or has worked on or is left already in the business but used to work on. So this notion of reinventing the wheel and sort of causing duplicates in different systems or even in the same system.
Yeah, so if you're busy creating a transaction in SAP around a particular customer, and that customer number combined with that particular material that you're trying to sell them resides in an Excel spreadsheet or an email, that somehow or other that intelligence comes through to you so that you know that, or buying something or selling something or anything like that.
And maybe the point is it doesn't matter from the user's point of view if it's sales data or line production data, because that could then be tailored by saying, okay, now let's contextualize it to the person and that person's interests or role in the organization.
Yeah, the SAP role will define.
Exactly. But what Serendipity is allowing is basically an ability to build the query against a structured set of data where previously you had unstructured content. What's that query going to be at the end of the day? How are you guys all working in terms of teams? Are you and the other guy in the same team from 315? No. Okay. And then you guys from SSD, are you all in the same team?
Yeah, we're in the same
Willem, which team are you?
Myself and Baldu and Johan are in the team.
Yourself and who and Johan?
Baldu and Johan.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in your team?
Is it? Well, it's me, Lucian, and
Okay.
Aileen,
Okay.
and forget the other lady's name.
Amanda.
Okay.
So what about from you, Jan? Any questions, comments, ideas, things to add to the conversation? Or are you keeping it a secret?
Yes.
And you, Jay?
I'm fine. My brain's racing.
I think this is extremely useful in the service process within such a CIC process. The text boxes that they have, the guys who to mine that data is extremely difficult, and it's something that customers ask for more. I know business objects got a tool to do that, but it's extremely cumbersome to use. And this will, I think, bridge that gap. Really, if you're looking for content or text added by a customer interaction center agent about a customer, and the customer came back and said, or when you spoke to the customer, if you're looking for certain keywords, you're looking for certain text. Currently, customers cannot do that. The system doesn't allow them to do that. And there's no add-on that I know of that can do that.
That allows you to search those text strings.
Yeah. You have T-Rex within SAP, but that's also not that effective. And also knowledge articles within that propose certain, for instance, in an ITSM environment where a printer is faulty and it proposes solutions. It uses T-Rex, but it proposes an entire article, not just not a keyword or I just need to know this paragraph in that document explaining exactly how to fix this problem. It's very difficult to get to that currently. And I think this will be extremely useful.
Could you set that up?
Yeah, we can set up something like that.
See, when we first started with all of this and talking to Britehouse, there was an obvious thing with 315 around SharePoint, right? SharePoint is the document management system, etc., etc. A lot of the guys from an SAP landscape said, no, SAP is structured. And we said, now hold on, is it really? Or are we increasingly having customer interaction centers and text chat? And actually, yes, you've got a formalized structured workflow around a check requisition, but meanwhile, as you say, a mountain of stuff outside of SAP is actually related to that transaction. And I speak to a customer who says, sure, we're using SAP and you have to, but you can see how people also work around it. You can find ways to do things in their mail. And I said, but how can they do that? You've got it. No, they do it. So if you can just sort of take a view that says, sure, there's a structured workflow, but still probably only a small percentage of what people's day is about. So how do you tap into the rest of it? There must be an enormous opportunity in the kind of SAP context. And I think almost anything we do, even if it's a small prototype, is going to be very interesting at a group level. So even this thing with Mercedes, where they were saying, okay, just index the chat logs from the CRM. I mean, it's not like we're reinventing sort of rocket science, but it's useful, and it's just that one thing. And the guy from Mercedes is like, yes, I can see value in bringing automated intelligence to this. So it doesn't have to be like this giant invention, just that application of it was interesting to Mercedes.
Would Serendipity be able to index text and score keywords to say which ones are most important? I'm thinking in the scenario where I'm starting to type about index that and tell me these are the most crucial keywords, and then feed that back into a search engine to be able to return results.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's what that is. So
that's scored from.
It's weighted already.
Okay.
Cool.
So it's the
So
same
that's-
API that does your
that's
keywords could be able to get back into the keywords.
Yes, exactly. So you saw in our search where the
That scores there. I just wasn't sure about the relevance.
let me just search for Google again. And obviously the more, this is when law of averages kicks in, the more data you have, the more it will make sense. But your results are weighted, and then with that weighting you can do everything. So our related search term uses those weightings. So when I search for Google, related terms are Google companies, big data technology, Facebook, and then much further down the line, that's Stogaber and Google Analytics, for example.
And I would get that back. So obviously this is by category, and each word within that would have weighting, so I could push them and put it together.
Yeah.
And
Well, the weighting, we don't give you a number, it's just the first result is the most important result. So it's the order.
we don't get the weighting.
No, you don't get a number. We use the number internally. We say that number. No, the number won't make sense to you.
No, I'm just thinking of scoring. So, for example, I'm not sure what the exact
Score, right? It is what if there's 10 records returned.
Yeah, the
How
first
do they-
one is.
how they returned?
But I don't know if the first one is an agent or a key phrase or.
The API will tell you that, but it won't order it between the types.
Okay, so they're already in order of reference. So if I wanted to group them like this, I would have to.
Yes, so you could then just take that order and then order them again by the types of you have the weighting in each category.
Okay. I was looking for the reverse, but yes, cool.
Cool.
I mean, just sorry, one last. From an SAP point of view, the guy comes on to whatever the primary home screen is, looking for some transaction, make a request. At that point, with something which is much more like sort of SharePoint and enterprise, so would that be of relevance to people? In other words, just for interest, here's recommended content that matches your role and matches your profile. How would we put that into an SAP scenario? Or how would you send a person mail shot saying, as a SAP end user, here are transactions that meet your area of interest, or there's content recommended for you to take a look at?
I think it would be nicer to have it as part of the GUI. Although with SAP, the options with GUI with the GUI has changed quite considerably. So in the South African context, most people use a very sort of old traditional type GUI, which which I don't know, maybe there's an opportunity to actually put something a bit more dynamic in there. In Europe they use a much more modern kind of GUI, which hasn't really been adopted properly here. But so there certainly is opportunity to present something in your workspace, I think.
I think that the trick with SAP, as I understand it, is it's got to be much more in line with your work context. In other words, a guy's not coming onto SAP like a portal to just surf around and see what's going on in the company like an intranet. He's helping a customer perform a transaction. It's customer information center, or interaction center. What's it called? Interaction center. And so it would be about bringing back content relevant to that context at a point in time. So in other words, I've got a customer called Tell Nathan. What else can you tell me about him?
See, there's so many different scenarios, because you do have those people that are doing basic transactional stuff. Then you have the CRM or the ITSM or the service desk type environment, or a BI portal environment, which is all SAP related, but they all have such different front ends. So it might be a case of saying, well, which is the most logical type of front end to start trying to present.
I'm thinking in CRM sales environment, where we have the pipeline management, so everybody is working together, everybody knows who's customers. But if you're busy preparing a presentation for a customer, like what I said, if you can mine emails that went out about this customer before I go and see the customer, if I look at my opportunity sheet and I see this is what's in there, but at the bottom, if you can have a proposal of, did you know about this email or this content that's been discussed with the customer, or sitting in a spreadsheet somewhere, or a document somewhere. That'll be extremely useful, I think, to a salesperson.
The reality is that although there's obviously a lot of transactions happening because of all the financial postings that happen on a day-to-day basis in ERP, a lot of time is spent in Office products, in Exchange and Excel, for example. So it's almost like, you know, perhaps actually Outlook is the best place to have something that maybe looks at what's going on in SAP, so it interrogates SAP's data, but its presentation is not so much the GUI as it is in an Outlook type environment. You know, maybe it looks at the Office documents and looks at SAP, and somewhere something's proposed to you in that environment.
To generate the metadata from the emails, check the documents themselves and get
Look, I think there's some brainstorming that we can certainly do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree, like that feeling has always been the same, that that's where we live, and that's where our minds are thinking around knowledge and finding information, as opposed to, I imagine, SAP, you're there to do a very specific task and it's in and out.
Yeah. Look, I think the service desk, which is used by a lot of people, and the CRM front end. In fact, the service desk now uses the CRM front end GUI. So, and that's a web-based GUI. So I think there is opportunity in that space to have something, because it's a web-based, and it's got, you know, a very kind of the look and feel with your my to-dos and the way that you can drag and drop stuff around. It's starting to get that. I think the opportunity is there. The more traditional GUI, I don't think it's really a place that you will use.